Before we begin off the record, I need to share something important. When federal funding was cut, WKAR lost $1.6 million. Thanks to cost-saving measures and community support, we've closed much of that gap. But we still face a $500,000 shortfall, and we can't finish the job without you. Your financial support keeps programs like Off the Record freely available to everyone in Mid-Michigan. How can you help? Become a sustaining donor today. Already a sustainer? Please consider increasing your monthly contribution. Visit wkar.org/OTR to donate, or click the link in the description. Now, Off the Record.
House Republican Speaker Matt Hall is up next with our OTR update on how to grow jobs, coming up right now.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Bellwether Public Relations, a full-service strategic communications agency partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and issue advocacy. Learn more at bellwetherpr.com. And now, this edition of Off the Record with Tim Skubic.
Thank you very much. Welcome back to Off the Record Studio C. Well, the road package is out, and the Citizens Research Council says there's some loopholes in there. Let's take a look. The new Michigan Road Fix Package projections show that revenue will grow from just over $1 billion this year to $3 billion for the roads by the year 2031. However, this chart from the Citizens Research Council suggests there is no guarantee, there is no guarantee that all the dollars will be there when they are needed.
I've presented the 2025 transportation funding package in the way that I think the legislature intended for it to work. But it's not going to work that way. It's not yet clear how it's going to work yet, but there are some major pitfalls.
Part of the road money comes from a wholesale tax on marijuana, but that is being legally challenged by the growers. Hence,
so there's extreme uncertainty about the revenue that will be available through the marijuana wholesale tax.
Part of the money also comes from the state's corporate income tax, but there's a hitch there too. More uncertainty.
The roads earmark will only become available after $1.25 billion is dedicated to other uses. It's not entirely clear how much of the anticipated revenue through the corporate income tax will ultimately become available.
The research does predict, however, that revenue collected at the pump will steadily increase, but some others argue if EVs become more popular and gas-driven cars get more mileage per gallon, the gas tax over time could actually be less. But there is good news for local governments. Counties will get 39% of this new pie, municipalities 22%. So-called driveway to highway projects. But uncertainty over money exists there too.
Which is actually a big deal to road agencies. Construction projects are planned years in advance. It's going to cause some headaches for a lot of people.
But with all this uncertainty over money, this does have a long-term impact on projects, the researchers say. And if you think this package is a quick fix for your roads, think again.
There will be a few years of lag time before we start seeing real results from this funding translated into system improvements.
That giant thud you heard over in the corner is our guest today, who I'm sure will have something to say on this. But this sort of came out of nowhere, this analysis.
The analysis, sure, but the concerns over funding related to the roads package has been well discussed since we voted on that package a couple weeks back now. You know, you bring up the 24% marijuana wholesale tax that's being challenged in courts right now over a belief that the vote to impose the tax was done with not enough members of the House and Senate. So from the jump, there's always been concern about this money. You know, I think even in the report, though, they did note that, you know, should it come through, will be, I believe, one of like the top 15 better funded states for roads. So I think it's just reinforcing what we already knew, that a lot of this money is in flux. There's a lot of question marks that are still around it. If we're able to get it, great. But like you pointed out, it's still a huge headache for folks who really have to count those beans.
Yeah, I mean, I would even go just a wee bit further, that as this was being voted on, that there was an asterisk in bold face, bigger type size, that there's a lot of speculation around it, and in some instances, just it seemed like they were voting in order to say that they got something done, and then sort of sweep up the ashes in the morning.
Well, and in fairness, though, we needed something done, right? I mean, we're headed towards a road funding cliff. I will acknowledge that something is better.
But that's the question: is this it?
Right, and that's kind of where we're at right now. We're walking that tightrope.
If you had a choice, you would go with a solid fund that has a steady stream that is not going to have this problem, Chuck.
Well, you're right. Well, let's look for a second on the bright side, if you can find a bright side in this. Okay. The fact that road repair,
you could serve in the legislature.
Yeah, I know. Road repair construction, that won't happen. Road repair construction will continue here in Michigan. There was a chance that nothing was going to happen, or that all of a sudden you would see the skids coming on. So I'm sure that all the legislators, as well as the governor, as well as the speaker, will say, we are continuing to repair our roads, and we got a fund of money coming in. But the CRC is a very reputable organization, over 100 years old. Eric Lufer has been in that position a long time. He has oftentimes called it right, and I think he's putting up the red flag saying, okay, let's not be concerned just about the amount of money coming in. Let's be concerned about where it's going and how it's coming in. And you're both right. There are some big question marks out here, depending on the lawsuit with marijuana and all these other things, that this stuff could go up in flux.
Well, ultimately, if this element falls apart, they just come back and find another vehicle. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice.
Why are you guys laughing?
Long as it's not EV,
right? But if that other vehicle existed that was more reliable than this house of cards, yeah.
Well, who knows what happens between now and then? Okay, it's still a jump ball, but it is a question mark. All right, the question is the governor's race. Stevie Mitchell had a poll out this week, Chuck. Shows Ms. Benson winning the Democratic primary and John James winning the Republican primary. Next question.
It's an interesting potential matchup here between two attractive candidates, two well-known candidates here. One, congressman from Macomb County, and then, of course, Ms. Benson, who's, been the Secretary of State, so she's all well-known all across this state. And then, of course, you have Mike Duggan sitting out there testing the independent side. Came in at, I think, 18% on that poll. The race with him doesn't really begin until after the primary, when the general comes in. That's because he doesn't have that opposition in the primary, even though he's going to be running hard. He's running hard already now. No. He's running hard. He's out there. He's got billboards all over the state right now. But it is an interesting matchup. Perhaps one of the most interesting things is Garland Gilchrist. Just kind of falls into that 12%, I think, was the matchup. And it's that sort of kiss of death for lieutenant governors. Very rarely do they get to move on to the number one position.
You have to go back to 2-year terms to find a sitting lieutenant governor who succeeds in an election, a governor of the same party.
Ms. Benson and Mr. James are at 48%. What did you make of these numbers?
I thought it was interesting that 68% of the people polled were over 45. I think that shuts the door on a much younger audience. I don't think that it's any surprise that the two names the two front runners in this race are folks with the widest level of current name recognition. Obviously, Rogers has served before, but most recently we're talking James is currently in office, Benson is currently in office. For Republicans, I would potentially be a little concerned with James polling that well. I mean, we've seen a historic track record from him at the state level that he has not performed well enough to net a statewide seat. I believe this would be the third time he's run for a state level seat. He was able to secure the vote in Macomb, but there is a solid Republican contingency there.
Each time he ran, he got better.
Well, but he's also now annoyed the president.
How much better?
But the president of the United States had even pointed out, rightfully so, when James had announced, he's like, hey, you just got here. You're already trying to get out the door and go to another seat. Even he cast out that was the correct thing to do. And so for Republicans, I think that it's time for a little bit of soul searching and saying, hey, if we want to be really serious about the governor's race, we need to know what's going to come next, because if James is the guy, he has a proven track record of not doing well statewide.
And you can't totally count Mike Cox out. Yes, he didn't look good in those initial numbers,
11%.
But it did show that if he were the nominee to go up against Benson, that it's pretty tight between the two of them. So the Republicans basically have two potentially good candidates to be able to run in this gubernatorial race. He's got money, and what's going to play into
his own money.
Well, that's money. The interesting thing is going to be on the Republican side, who plays for Donald Trump's endorsement and who really gets his backing and the MAGA backing. And next year, will that be a blessing or will it be a curse?
Well,
I think that's one of the big things. How much will Donald Trump matter, and how much will it make a difference, not just in the primary, but going into the general election? I mean, midterms can be brutal on the party in the White House.
Theme and variation on Chuck's point. What about the Trump people coming in and saying, Mr. James, you are going to get out of this race? Will they play that card? Because they want to keep control of Congress.
Absolutely. They're very concerned about losing Congress, in the House of Representatives in particular. It's close, and you're looking at some of these early races that we've just seen, in which Democrats have done pretty well across the nation. So that's just perhaps a forerunner of what's going to come next year and whether or not they can take the House back.
All right, quickly, I want to turn to the data center virtual hearing. Isn't the internet just wonderful? Okay, lots of people are showing up, and lots of people don't want to put
When you
these
say virtual hearing, you mean the Public Service Commission?
That's what I meant to say. Thank you, Rick.
You're
Appreciate that. Okay. And so what was this hearing all about, and what was the upshot of it? You want to take a shot at that, big guy?
I mean, look, a lot of people lined up to voice their opposition to the data centers. And these
DTE Energy says, look, your rates will not go up, and your availability of energy is fine, folks. And these folks are saying,
we don't believe you.
Yes.
And there's the local quality of life. There is the cost aspect of it, and then there's just the trust in terms of how necessary are these really. That the governor really wants data centers because they consider that a centerpiece to the new AI economy. But there's a lot of research out there that says maybe these aren't the silver bullet that they're being sold as.
Well, the real nif-gnawing here, Chuck, is over how quickly the PSC, Public Service Commission, makes this decision. The original drill was give them yes, please go ahead and do it, and everybody said, wait a second.
Well, not being named Chuck, but going for it anyways. No, I mean, listen, regardless of how you vote, I think any citizens' antenna should stand up when you hear a government institution say, just trust us, we're not going to go through a hearing, everything's going to be fine, we're going to spend a bunch of taxpayer dollars, and everything's going to be great. Don't worry about it. Everybody's antenna, the hair in the back of your neck should shoot straight up the second the second your government says, just believe us, it's fine. You can't go about it that way. I mean, you're even seeing that kind of tear between Nessel, who's pointing out, Attorney General Dana Nessel, who's at one point thick as thieves with Whitmer, saying, hey, no, absolutely not. Pump the brakes, where Whitmer's still, as of I believe as recently as yesterday, trying to say that time is of the essence and we have to move now.
So, Jordan, what do you think?
And keep in mind that this is also DTE asking for this, and it already has, in many people's eyes, a damaged reputation because they're always coming up asking for rate hikes and rate increases, and people are just leery of them. And when, as Rick said, when they make this big announcement that everything's going to be safe, this, that, and the other, people aren't convinced of it. And there's the economics of this, but there's also the environmental side that people are very concerned about. Most of these are being put into kind of rural type of areas where people have moved out there because they want that kind of quality of life, and all of a sudden this is going to change the entire dynamics. Now, on the flip side of this, it can bring jobs, it can bring money, it can help the tax base of areas that may be there.
I mean,
I saw conflicting numbers. One report said there would be a couple hundred jobs, not the construction jobs, but at the site, and then somebody else said it was 35. Okay, so which is it? We don't know.
No, we don't.
Let's discuss this issue and others as we call in House Speaker Matt Hall. Mr. Hall, welcome back to Off the Record. Let's get you in this conversation. Do you have a position on data centers, yay or nay?
So I voted no on the legislation to create the tax incentive for the data centers. We're trying in Michigan to cut the income tax. We're trying to cut property taxes, and when you keep doing these carve out on sales tax, it makes the job harder. I've paid attention to the discussion. I think there should be a robust public debate. I have concerns about this, and I look at it. We put in the legislation, in the law, that they can't charge higher rates to other people to pay for the data center. But I have concerns because the Whitmer administration and I believe Quentin Messer at the MEDC are the ones that are monitoring that and holding that accountable, and I don't trust them.
So if you were sitting on the PSC, you would be a no vote.
I would probably vote no.
Why don't you trust the administration and the Michigan Economic Development Corporation to stand by what they say their role is?
Because I've looked at their record on all of their failed economic development programs and even these pork spending projects, and they pay out the money without following all the steps and all the laws. So I'm concerned that they will not monitor this appropriately. And as a result, there's not going to be enough oversight, and it probably will turn out to be a rate increase for the people.
Why? What is in it for the Whitmer administration and the MEDC to move to try to push ahead with a project that's not going to deliver on its promises?
I think there's a lot of pressure on the administration to deliver the sound bites on a short-term win. The governor has done a lot of these ribbon cuttings on big deals. And let's face it, right, this data center project, there's a lot of big names in it. This is something that the president has talked about. This is a big one, right? This is a big national story. The governor calls it, I think, the biggest economic development project in the history of Michigan. So that's the incentive. The problem is, it's not the governor checking every day on the back end to make sure they perform. It's Quentin Messer who has a failed record of this. It's other people in the administration, and then she's going to leave in a year, and there'll be another governor doing it. So I just have a concern there isn't going to be the oversight to ensure they actually do it. And secondly, why are we giving them these big tax breaks when I don't believe these data centers really do create the jobs? I mean, most of them are around 35. The governor promotes numbers like you were talking about for this one in the hundreds. But really what we've seen in the research I've done is these things are under construction all the time. And so most of the jobs are these construction jobs. And so the unions and a lot of the construction workers are happy. That's great. But it's why are we giving them huge incentives for 35 people to sit in an empty building? That's a challenge for me.
Well, what should the state be measuring as barometers of success when it comes to economic incentives?
So I think the number of jobs and the wages, right? So we saw this failed, some of these failed battery plants that Whitmer was working on. They were low-paying jobs. I mean, these are jobs that are below average wages. So if we're going to be paying for jobs, then they should be very high-paying jobs, and they should be in fields that we should be paying for, because the goal of this is to get a return on investment for the people of Michigan. You should be getting more money into the state than what you're paying the companies, and under some of these other deals, they're very expensive deals, and we're not getting the return.
Mr. Speaker, Tim opened up with the CRC's latest analysis of our road funding plan. Do they have it right? And were you all maybe a little too hasty in pushing all this through, and we have some real concerns out here?
Yeah, so what I've noticed is ever since I went to the Oval Office with Gretchen Whitmer, the Citizens Research Council has been attacking everything her and I are working together on. They had some really suspicious numbers on the budget. Our budget that we passed, bipartisan, was smaller than the one last year. Even under their charts, it was smaller. But I'm looking at their analysis, so I started looking into them, just so you know. There's a lot of radical left groups that donate to this group. And also I looked, and their senior leadership, these guys all donate to Democrats. So I'm very suspicious of the CRC. I don't have the same confidence in them you do. But I'll tell you this, We told Gretchen Whitmer, I sat in a room, looked her in the eye, and said, I'll match you dollar for dollar, cutting waste, fraud, and abuse to new revenue. And Winnie Brinks said, well, I don't know what I want, so you tell me what to do. I said, okay, we're gonna do marijuana tax and the EVs. We now have parity on the EVs with the gas drivers. That was important. And then on the other, I just said, well, if Gretchen Whitmer's done her homework, if her lawyers say it's good, fine. If it's not, well, then we'll cut more waste, fraud, and abuse. I mean, we identified $5 billion of waste, fraud, and abuse. We've only cut $800 million of that, so I go right back to that. And then I'll just say, I looked very carefully at the corporate income tax when we did this deal. We wanted to shift this from the regular income tax to the corporate income tax, because one of the goals of a lot of these candidates running for governor is to eliminate the income tax. Well, if the roads are how you pay, what you use the income tax money for, then you're pitting a very important public benefit against cutting the income tax. So we moved it over the corporate income tax. We looked at the history of the corporate income tax. It's gone up every year. Now, 1.2, I think, was what we had to do, because some of this is negotiating, right? So the governor really wanted to keep that first 1.2, so we took the next 500 or whatever it is. But I have a person who works for me, Chris Jones. He's been working on transportation for 30 years. He knows this stuff in and out, and we went through this and said this is going to be good. So for the CRC to come in now, I think it's just they're mad at me and Whitmer for working with Trump, honestly.
Absent the CRC report, excuse me though, we obviously have the ongoing lawsuit with the 24% marijuana wholesale tax. In your mind, what happens should the court say that the vote was done in error and that we don't have the ability to impose that 24% tax?
Well, the first thing I'll point out is the cuts, the $800 million of waste, fraud, and abuse that we cut out of departments of government, which includes 2,000 ghost employees. These are fake workers that they were using to pad programs, wasteful grant programs, all kinds of waste, fraud, and abuse. The economic development programs we discussed, we cut it. There's another $4 billion of waste, fraud, and abuse. So the first thing I would do is I would cut out more of that waste, fraud, and abuse permanently, and I would dedicate that to roads through a vehicle like the corporate income tax or a different tax. The reason that we're talking about the income tax or the corporate income tax, those two dump heavily into the general fund. So instead of saying we're going to piecemeal this year by year, when we made those permanent cuts to waste, fraud, and abuse, we forced them to be permanently dedicated to roads. So that stays. That was my part of the deal. This is Whitmer's part of the deal. So if they didn't do their research on this, then that's their problem. I've got more waste, fraud, and abuse that we can cut.
If I may,
No, go ahead.
One
please.
more question, though, on economic development. The House and the Senate have sort of dueling economic development packages regarding a payroll tax capture. We have about 6 days left of legislative days scheduled. How confident are you that we'll be able to come to some level of a consensus on this before the end of the year?
Yeah, well, now I've endorsed for the next Senate Democrat leader, because I want to pick him, not the Democrats. I've endorsed Darren Camilleri because I think he'll be the easier one to beat. But unfortunately, I'm working with Sam Singh on this one, who's the other candidate. So we're working with Sam Singh. Sam Singh worked on this with Governor Whitmer the first time when they did good jobs, and so he's bringing a lot of valuable experience to the table. And we're talking through it, and we're getting closer together, making a deal. But we won't have a deal until I get in the room with Gretchen Whitmer and make that deal. And then we'll get Singh and the Democrats to do it.
You're not going to have a deal this year.
Well, if we don't have a deal this year, it'll be because Winnie Brinks backs out. Because I'll tell you, we made a commitment to each other when we did the budget that we were all going to try to do this by the end of the year. And I'm committed to trying to make that happen.
Well, wait a second. She's not even part of this equation. It says you and Sam Singh are working this thing.
Well, she's delegated that to Sam Singh, so maybe she'll have to step in,
don't they?
Well, she might have to step in to perform on her word if he can't do it. But hopefully, she's told him that we have a goal by the end of the year. You never know with them; they're a very dysfunctional caucus.
So, considering how much time you have left, it seems like the prospect for big things is diminishing. But what are the things that you can do to set the table for next year?
Well, I think, I'm really proud of the fact that we're on a pace to set the record for fewest public acts in the history of Michigan. Kyle Malin looked up, I think he found 89 in 1856. We have 35 public acts. So I think you'll see, we'll move a few more. Because it's hard, it's 35. How can you do fewer than that next year?
But what sorts of things would you move?
Policy priorities.
Well, we're looking at that. So, we're looking. There's some things with farmers that they have certain tax benefits that are going to expire at the end of the year. There's a bill on the land survey, Indiana and Michigan, that we've got to do by the end of the year. For some reason, we're still disputing what that border is. So there's certain things with deadlines. But I'll just say, so I've authorized us to work with Brinks, and there are conversations going on to move, I'd say, about 20 more bills. So the only way we're going to break the record, and I want to be under 89. That's where I want to be. The only way we go over that is if the Democrats actually pass Republican bills out of the House without a deal, and they won't do that because they're too proud. So I think we're going to break a record, and I was at the ALEC conference. There's legislators across the country celebrating what we're doing in Michigan. We just won an award for the best budget proposal in the country with our $5 billion of waste, fraud, and abuse we cut, and they love that we're holding the line against the governor and these Democrats in the Senate and protecting the taxpayers of Michigan.
Mr. Speaker, for a number of weeks now, you have said, as soon as I get in that room with the governor, we'll make a deal. How come you're not in the room with the governor making a deal, sir?
Because the staff is doing a lot of the preliminary work.
Does the staff have to work on this thing before the two of you sit down and say, let's just do this?
Well, these are complex negotiations. You've seen that they've got it wrong in the past, and so the staff is getting it close, and once they've got it close, then I'll go in and close that deal with Governor Whitmer, and then Brinks will perform.
Are you 85% there?
I think that's right.
All right, so there is still a shot at getting this done this year.
There is, and we're going to work really hard to do it. But once we get a little closer and we're ready, where we're in the final few pieces, then I'll get in the room with Governor Whitmer and I'll get a deal.
What's the big sticking point?
I think the big sticking point is we don't want it to be through MEDC, and traditionally it's gone through MEDC.
Would you like to stay for overtime?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
I'd be happy to have you do that. Please do. Go to WKAR.org for more of our conversation with the Speaker, but look at these closed credits first.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Bellwether Public Relations, a full-service strategic communications agency partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and issue advocacy. Learn more at bellwetherpr.com. For more Off the Record, visit WKAR.org. Michigan public television stations have contributed to the production costs of Off the Record.